All right, it is the moment you guys have all been waiting for, the final picks video going over our interest levels for the main series, the Cup series at Richmond. For whatever reason, this video always does the best. I think last week, what were we at, Kev? Like 800? Is that how many we
I
got up
think
to?
we finished with a little over 820 views.
Yeah, which is just crazy to us. We were just four friends that enjoyed watching the races, and we decided to, start recording some stuff and putting our thoughts on paper. And lo and behold, we have people out there who tune in and listen to what we have to say. So thank you for all the support. Our goal is eventually to get up to 1,000 subscribers, but it'd be really great if we could get to 400 by the end of this weekend. I think we're only 23 away. So plenty of time to hit that goal. And hopefully we'll have our first 1,000 view video right around the corner as well. A couple of milestones for us. But enough about that, because you guys just want the picks. So let's we already did kind of an initial preview video earlier in the week, kind of going over strategy and stuff. So if you haven't watched that, it might be a good video to watch in addition to this. But let's just jump right into the drivers, Kev, because I think there's a lot we have to talk about here. So I'm going to start with you. It's really interesting that we only have two 10K drivers this week for the Cup Series, but to either of them kind of draw your interest, draw your attention this weekend?
I mean, to be completely honest, I think DK's starting to kind of figure this new car out in a sense, not necessarily figure it out as much as just realize that there's a lot more drivers in play this week and from week to week in general as there were last year. Like last year, Kyle Larson was 11K every week, 11K plus every week. We don't see an 11K driver this week, and we only have two 10K drivers. And what that tells me is just Draftkings is starting to realize that there's a lot more drivers in play this week. Like we haven't really seen one driver jump out and just dominate every week to week like we did Larson last. I mean, Larson won 11 races if you count some of the expedition or those other races. And then this year we haven't seen that. It just seems like every week there's a different driver that's kind of jumping out, dominating and winning. We've seen new winner every week this year, I believe. And then, I mean, when it comes to Chase and Larson, they're obviously two of the better drivers in the series. We know Larson's one of the better, if not the best wheelman in the series. He just races. He tries to get behind everything, races a lot of dirt, which obviously is going to make you a little bit better at racing. And because that's why we have him as high as compared to Chase Elliott. On top of that, it's kind of rare to see Larson offer this much PD starting 21st. We just have a little bit more confidence in him just because he's that better wheelman. We haven't seen him dominate this year. But at 10K, starting 21st, I mean, obviously you need him to probably dominate some laps too to pull off that price tag. But he also offer a lot of PD, something we don't normally see from him. So it's someone we can keep an eye on. And Chase Elliott, don't love him this week, don't hate him. You'll see we kind of, in general, have this whole top 12, 13, 14 guys in this high to medium range just because it's hard to definitively say, like, this is the guy we think is going to dominate this race and win this race. There's just too much uncertainty this year. I think it's hard to go wrong with anybody in this range. You can make an argument for any of them, but in this 10K range, I would definitely go with Larson over Elliott just simply because he offers 6 more point differential points there, and he is just one of the better wheelmen in the series.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, if you are playing Elliott or Larson, you're not playing them because you think they're going to dominate at least the early part of the race, because you have to play that narrative out in your head. Okay, how does my lineup score points? How does my lineup become optimal? And when you get to Richmond, the way that you do that is rostering the drivers who start up front. Elliott and Larson don't have the track position. It's going to take them some time to get up towards the front of the pack. It might be, maybe potentially at the end of stage 1, maybe the start of stage 2. So if you are playing them, you imagine that they're going to take over later, during the race. So then once you drop down to the 9K range, you have some interesting mixes of some of the favorites to be that early, stage one dominator, and then some potential, GPP options who maybe it's a caution or they have a different pitch strategy or whatever it is, they might have the potential to get up front as well. So if you look at some of the early dominators, I think everyone is going to be playing Ryan Blaney this weekend. He starts on the pole. He had the fastest car in practice with the single car, 5-lap, 10-lap, 15, 20, 25. Everything was just screaming Ryan Blaney. So I think he's going to carry a lot of ownership. Like Kev was mentioning, track position is key at this track. So not only does he start first, he has the best pit stall selection. Our only fear with Blaney is his pit crew has been pretty bad this year. So we could see him leading all of stage one, which would work. And at the end of stage one, potentially losing the lead on pit road. So as long as he can still finish, relatively probably top 5 or, top 10 and lead all of stage one, I think that you can still make a good argument that he should be in your line. The other thing going against them is track history. It's not historically a good track for Blaney. So with all that ownership Blaney's going to get, I could see you either just going all in on him or coming in a little bit underweight to try to be different from the field. And then from there, if you're a contrarian person, if you don't think Blaney gets the early jump, maybe you think William Byron is going to be that play. Or if you are fading Blaney, hey, maybe I think Kyle Busch is going to be that play who starts right on the inside of him. You never know what could happen on this restart for whatever reason if Blaney doesn't work out to be that early dominator. Truex is a guy who, looking at track history, looks like a slam dunk play. But if you look at the 2022 version of Martin Truex Jr. and JGR as a whole, there's some pause for concern there. So I can understand, again, probably a driver who's going to carry a lot of ownership, either same thing with Blaney, going all in on him or coming a little bit underweight. But what about you, Kev? What do you think about some of these 9K drivers? I think they're all really interesting.
Yeah, I think you really kind of nailed it here. I think this 8 and 9K range is where you're really gonna make your gravy this week. But I think it really just comes down to really trying to think through and play out how you think this race is going to go in your head. Like Andrew was saying, like Blaney starts on the pole. Can't get any better track position than that. We know it's king here. We know his pit crew sucks this year, but it's how he played on your head. If he can get out, drive that lead early, we know he had the pit window to finish his first stage. So he leads the first 70 laps. That's great. You get 70 laps led, probably 30, maybe 40 fast laps there. Now you just need Blaney to finish top 5. But who's going to be that next dominator? That's where, I'm thinking maybe like a Truex or a Logano. Truex has been by far and away the most dominant driver here over the last few years, but we're a new car, new year. JGR, Truex haven't been the same this year as they haven't been in the past. But if you think he can get up there and lead that, be that next dominator, there's probably going to be 2, probably 3 dominators this race, maybe 4, probably. And that, so Truex, can he be one of those dominators? Can he be that guy that when Blaney's pit crew sucks, loses him a couple spots on pit road? Truex has a good pit crew, bumps him up. Maybe he, restarts second or third after that first stage, maybe in the pole, gets out there. And then does he lead you the next 60, 70, 80, 90 laps? We know he's led 80 plus laps last 7 out of 8 races here. There's a possibility. So then Truex leads, then who's next? That's where I jumped into like someone like a Logano. He starts 11th. He's not by any means the same level as Truex at this track historically, but he's still, this is still one of Logano's best tracks. He's still probably top 5 running this track. Starts 11th. Penske's been pretty good this year. So, maybe Logano's that guy that if Truex doesn't get there, he gets there. Truex gets there, leads some, then Logano makes his way up, gets there. So it's all going to be about how you think this this race is going to play out. We got to try to nail. If you can nail 2 out of 3 dominators, you're probably going to catch. If you can nail all 3, that's where you really got the shot of making those takedowns. That's for someone like, I really think Logano's going to do pretty good this week. He's been running pretty good all year. This is one of his better tracks. Penske as a whole has been good. Obviously, Blaney's been pretty fantastic this year. But then we move down in this 8K range, just where, another spot I think we make a gravy. Obviously, we got Chastain here. We got him as high. He won last week. Awesome to see that. Get that first career win out of the way. He's been awesome the last couple of years, especially this year. It's arguably been one of the top 3, definitely top 5 drivers this year in consistency, speed, all that, blah, blah. And another week the same. He was top 10 in practice and everything. We've just seen him run good all year. It's one of his better tracks. So, I see him being a top 10 and possibly getting up there, maybe leading a couple laps, blah, blah, blah. I think you can't count him out at all this week. And then someone like Alex Bowman here. So we've been talking about all these potential dominators, how this race is going to lead out, trying to nail those dominators, but there's not going to be 5, 6. There's not going to be 6 dominators. You got 6 guys in your line. There's not going to be 6 dominators. And if there are 6 dominators, there's no way in hell you're going to be able to afford all of them. So we got to find some of these other plays. And I think that's where someone like Alex Bowman really comes in. He starts 26, right? So he offers you a ton of PD, which is all these other guys we've been talking about, something they don't offer you. He's a Hendrick car. Hendrick has been phenomenal this year. 3 out of their 4 drivers have won, Alex Bowman being one of them. Comes in as the cheapest out of all of them. And he offers you that insane upside of starting 26. I mean, we don't need this guy to get a top 5. We don't need him to dominate. We don't need him to lead laps. We don't need him to get fast laps. We just need him simply, if he finishes top 10, he's absolutely going to blow your line away. He's going to have incredible points. And I think he has the possibility to do that this year. Bowman kind of always seems to, he doesn't ever seem to dominate, but he always kind of seems to find himself kind of in that position to succeed. And starting 26, I think that opportunity is definitely there without a doubt. What about you, Andrew?
Yeah, you brought up a lot of good points there. And, and I go back to, last year it was more or less pretty obvious, like, okay, these are going to be the 2 dominators, and it's pretty black and white. Where this year, and especially with how short practice has been and how we've just seen the cars running, like it more or less is wide open, at least in my point of view. There isn't, 1 or 2 drivers from like, oh, like they are the slam dunk dominator place. And because of that, I think there's 2 things you can do to, combat that. One, increase your, dominator pool to, your 6 guys, to include as many dominators in that line as possible. If you roster both Elliott and Larson together, like, yeah, they're still relatively pretty cheap, but Elliott and Larson aren't going to lead the early part of this race with track position. If you roster both of them, then maybe you're shrinking your potential dominator list from like 4 or 5 to maybe 2 or maybe only 3, where I would rather play a bulk of my drivers, in this 8K and 9K range, with the mentality and the mindset of, okay, of the 4 to 5 drivers that I'm going to select in this range, I think, these 2 drivers have a good chance of leading early. These 2 drivers have a good chance of leading sometime in the middle of this race. And hey, here are maybe 1 or 2 drivers who offer some good place differential that I can see getting up to the front at the end of their race. Look at those 6 drivers you selected, and how can all of them get to the front, or how can all of them score points for you that makes sense? Like, if you're playing, all the drivers who start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like, not all of them can lead at the same time. So be strategic when you're selecting your drivers. Like, maybe select, between one of Blaney, Byron, Bush and Briscoe. Maybe select one of them and say, okay, I think Byron is going to be the early leader. And then at the end of stage 1, I think Truex is going to take the lead. And then after that, I think it's going to be Logano. And then, hey, at the very end of the race, I think Alex Bowman with his place differential is finally going to be up there at the end of stage 3, and he's going to take over. Play that type of scenario out in your head when it kind of comes to really any of these drivers in the 8K, range on up. So for me, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to just jam in as many of these potential lap leaders as possible, and be strategic with the ones that I am, selecting into my line. But I can't play everyone in this range. You will have to drop down a little bit. So once you get lower on the slate, I think Kurt Busch offers you some good and basically anyone below here, we're not super confident they could get out front. There's some plays in there that maybe there's a GPP chance they get out front and lead some laps. But for the most part, I think most of your dominators are going to come from the 8K range on up. But I think Kurt Busch is a good place differential option. He starts deep in the field. He had some good practice times. We've seen him get some quality results. And then I think Austin Dillon is another really cheap this week. Starts deeper in the field. We've seen how good the Chevy teams have been running and RCR in general. So I like Austin Dillon a lot, but I know Eric Jones was someone that you were, kind of surprised with, or at least interested in after seeing how he performed in practice and qualifying. Kev, if you wanted to talk about him or really anyone else in this range.
Yeah, I think you nailed it with Bush and Dillon there. Obviously, Dillon offers that PD upside, and so does Kurt Busch. But yeah, I like Eric Jones this week. I mean, we've seen him all year be pretty fast. Kind of you've been hearing his name a lot more this year than you have in the past couple years. He starts fifth. He was really fast in practice, and that's speed transferred to qualifying. Starts fifth. So compared to everyone else in this range, like Kurt and Austin that offer you some upside, Jones does not. So he doesn't have that PD upside like these other guys do. But I don't think that means you can necessarily should count him out. I mean, starts fast. He's been fast. He's been consistently fast. His pit crew isn't the best, so that's kind of hurt him a little bit this year. But like last week, we saw him get in some trouble. He got knocked back all the way into the 30s, fought his way back and ended up with a top 10 and being optimal, or at least, helping you win money. So he starts fifth this week. So we don't need him to dominate laps, start with $7,600, but there's a possibility he does because he's fast. So if he can get up there, be that surprise dominator this week, and, we've seen him, it's a matter of time before this guy gets a win the way he's been racing so far this year. So this, we've seen every week we kind of seem to be surprised by a driver or two that just kind of come out of nowhere and kill it. So at Eric Jones, $7,600, if you're running multiple lines or just want to get a little risque this week and run a more GPP line trying to get them takedowns, I mean, this is a guy I think you seriously got to consider just based on his past performance and everything. But that's enough about risque Eric Jones. We'll just drop down into this lower range. So obviously, if you're trying to jam your line full of those 8K and on up drivers, because that's where dominators, that's where the guys that had the potential to win this race really, really come from. You're going to need at least one, if not two of these guys down in here. So we'll start with Dinger here. He kicked ass this week in the Xfinity race. And he starts 26 and he comes in under 7K. So we saw him run pretty good last week. If it wasn't for that crazy finish we had, he would have won. Granted, this is no right turns in this race, so it's a little bit different than last week. But he offers us that PD, comes in cheap. These color cars have been great this year, so he's a guy I'm going to have in my player pool. Move on down here. You got Stenhouse and Haley. They both start in 30, so they're starting to get into that range here where they don't really have much downside. They're like the likelihood of them hurting your line is not as high as those guys that are starting top 15. Because if they wreck out, I mean, they're not going to lose you points, or they're not going to lose you that many points. So Stenhouse wasn't the greatest in practice, didn't have the greatest speed. We know he's in decent equipment. We know he can wheel a car from time to time. And at this salary, we're just looking for that PD. We don't need these guys to dominate. We don't need these guys to finish top 15. I mean, if they finish top 25, they're more than going to pay off their price range. So that's, there's something to look at. The only thing to say about Haley is he does have to do a pass-through penalty because of where he or not being able to pass inspection and all that. So he's probably going to end up a lap down. But I know it's a short track. There's a lot of laps. But, I mean, it's going to lap down that early is probably going to be relatively easy for him to get that lap back either through a free pass or pass through or what have you. So he should be able to get back on that lead lap and then improve his position from there. So I'm not too worried about that. Starts 36. So, I mean, second to DFL. So, I mean, you can't really hurt your line. Just offers a ton of upside there. He comes in pretty cheap. And, I mean, he's been running really good this year. But I'll let you finish out this value section here, Andrew.
Yeah. So Richmond historically isn't a track that sees a lot of cautions. It doesn't see a lot of wrecks. It's normally a long green flag run. Um, and normally the tracks you want to punt at are, some of these short tracks where dominators are really important, or tracks that have a lot of attrition, where there are a lot of cautions, there are a lot of wrecks, where these guys have opportunities to advance their position and fight for maybe a top 25 finish, which top 25 finish, which is a big day for them. Or hey, I just need you to finish 30th and stay on the track, because if I can slam in 4 to 5 dominators and they lead 100 plus laps, well, hey, I don't really care if you finish 30th, because I got the guy that led 100 plus laps in my line because of that. So I don't know if it's like the go-to punt weekend that does allow you to stack some of the dominators. And if you are punting, I think you relatively want to just kind of play it safer with just kind of rostering some of the guys who who kind of start in the back. But um one thing, if you saw with the Xfinity series, like sometimes pivoting and selecting the right punts can make or break a line. Like, yeah, they might not score you negative points if they have a bad day, but they're still going to hold your line back. So I think Stenhouse and Haley are going to carry a ton of ownership. So I don't mind pivoting, to Allmendinger to try to get a little bit different, playing the ownership game. And it'll be really interesting once you get all the way to the bottom of the slate. Like, Todd Gilliland's been the best punt play every single week. Doesn't matter where he starts. He's always paying off his price. He's always getting good finishes. So I'm curious if he's starting 22nd, if that keeps ownership off of him or not. Another guy who's been just a slam dunk punt play is Ty Dillon. So I think if you do have to come down this low on the slate, I don't mind going to Ty Dillon and Gillen. If you want to get really crazy and get really weird, I think you can come all the way down to BJ McLeod. But with how soft the pricing is, you don't really have to get this low on the slate. Normally, to stack dominators, you would, but with how soft pricing is, it's pretty easy to select, 4 or 5 drivers, out of this range, and then, pair them with a 7K driver or 6K driver and, call it a night. So I know it's a little bit of a longer video, but we really wanted to kind of go over the slate because it's really interesting. It's a lot different than most of the other ones that we've seen so far this year. But that'll do it for the final picks video. Like I said, the goal is to get up to 400 subscribers, hopefully by the end of this weekend. I know our 1,000 view videos is right around the corner, so fingers crossed we get there soon. And yeah, best of luck this weekend. Any final words, Kev?
No, all I got is, if you want this spreadsheet, hit up the Twitter at FastCarsFM. Please like and subscribe to this video. Let's get to 400 this week. Have a good one, everybody. Let's hit the green.